Did you ever stop and think about how the school lunches you ate in the 1980s would be illegal today? Those cafeteria meals shaped our childhoods, filling trays with foods we trusted completely. So what changed so drastically that the lunches we loved are now forbidden? Whole milk served in every carton was the unquestioned standard in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s, sitting in metal coolers beside the lunch line like tiny white soldiers waiting to be chosen. Kids grabbed them without thinking, peeling back the paper spout and drinking deeply while chatting with friends. Parents believed milk was simply good for growing bodies, and nobody questioned whether the fat content mattered. The creamy richness felt like part of the meal itself, something that washed down the heaviest cafeteria foods and left a satisfying film on the lips. Teachers encouraged it, nurses praised it, and lunch ladies handed out extras to anyone who asked. But when federal nutrition guidelines changed, whole milk became a target almost overnight. Studies linked full-fat dairy in childhood to weight concerns that worried health officials nationwide. Regulators stepped in and declared that only skim or 1% milk could be offered to students in public schools. The cartons stayed the same, but the contents grew thinner and far less satisfying to those who remembered how milk used to taste. Deep-fried fish sticks made with trans fats were a cafeteria treasure that arrived every Friday like clockwork, golden and crispy and practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. Kids lined up eagerly because Fish Stick Day meant something special, a break from the usual rotation that felt almost celebratory. The breading crackled with each bite, giving way to flaky white fish that tasted vaguely of the ocean and heavily of the deep fryer. What nobody realized was that those fryers bubbled with partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, a cooking fat that made everything crispier and quietly dangerous. Lunch ladies loaded baskets and lowered them into shimmering pools of oil reused all week, each batch absorbing more trans fats that scientists would later connect to heart disease. Parents assumed fried fish was still healthy, still a reasonable choice for growing children. Schools kept serving them because the cost was low and the kids kept eating. But when the truth about trans fats finally surfaced, regulators moved fast. Today, partially hydrogenated oils are completely banned from school kitchens, and the fish sticks that remain taste different, lacking the signature crunch of the forbidden fats. Pink slime meat fillers in ground beef were one of the cafeteria secrets that nobody talked about because nobody even knew they existed. The hamburgers and taco meat that children ate throughout the 1980s contained something called lean, finely textured beef, a product made from scraps and trimmings, spun in centrifuges and treated with ammonia to kill bacteria. It stretched the meat supply, lowered costs, and allowed schools to serve more students with smaller budgets. Kids bit into burgers believing they were eating real ground beef, never imagining that a portion came from processed leftovers that barely resembled meat. The texture blended in perfectly, masked by ketchup, mustard, and whatever else children piled on top. For years, this filler moved through school kitchens without question. But when journalists and food safety advocates exposed the practice, the public reaction was fierce. Parents demanded transparency, regulators tightened requirements, and pink slime was eventually banned from school cafeterias nationwide. Today, ground beef served to students must meet stricter standards that leave no room for the mystery fillers that once stretched every serving. Unlimited salt shakers on cafeteria tables were as common as napkin dispensers, sitting within arm's reach of every student who wanted to season their food without restriction. Kids grabbed them instinctively, shaking white crystals across mashed potatoes, green beans, and anything else that seemed too bland. No one monitored how much sodium poured out, and no one worried about health consequences hiding in each generous shake. It felt like freedom, like being trusted to make your own choices about how food should taste. Some children turned it into a game, competing to see who could pile the most salt onto a single tray. Lunch aides rarely intervened because seasoning food seemed harmless compared to other mischief students could cause. But those tiny shakers added up. When health researchers began connecting childhood sodium intake to long-term blood pressure problems, school nutrition guidelines changed dramatically. Salt shakers were pulled from tables, and kitchens were required to prepare foods within strict sodium limits. Today, giving students unlimited access to salt seems almost reckless. a relic of an era that trusted children with choices we now understand were never truly safe. Full sugar chocolate pudding cups were the crown jewels of the cafeteria dessert section, small plastic containers filled with smooth sweetness that made even the worst lunch days feel survivable. Kids peeled back the foil lids with anticipation, sometimes licking them clean before diving into the pudding with plastic spoons that bent under the pressure of eager scooping. The chocolate flavor was intense and unapologetically sweet, the kind of dessert that coated your tongue and lingered long after the last bite. Schools offered them freely, sometimes encouraging seconds for students who finished their main courses. Parents saw pudding as a harmless treat, something that made children happy without causing obvious harm. But those little cups contained far more sugar than anyone realized, packed into servings that exceeded what modern nutritionists consider safe for a single meal. When federal guidelines began restricting added sugars in school meals, chocolate pudding cups became one of the first casualties. The versions available today are reformulated with artificial sweeteners or reduced sugar content that changes the taste entirely. For anyone who remembers the original, the difference is clear. White bread for every sandwich was the unspoken rule in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s. Soft slices that held together peanut butter, bologna, and whatever else lunch workers assembled each morning. The bread was pale, pillowy, and completely devoid of anything resembling whole grain nutrition. Kids loved it because it was familiar, the same bread their mothers used at home, the same texture they associated with comfort and normalcy. Nobody questioned whether refined flour was good for growing bodies because nobody thought about bread as anything other than a vehicle for fillings. Schools bought it in bulk because it was cheap, lasted long, and never drew complaints from picky eaters. The sandwiches stacked up on trays by the hundreds, wrapped in plastic or nestled in paper boats, waiting for hungry students who never imagined their bread choices mattered. But when nutrition science caught up with cafeteria menus, white bread became a symbol of everything wrong with school lunches. Federal mandates now require that at least half of all grains served in schools be whole grain rich, effectively banning the pure white bread that once dominated every lunch line. Canned fruit swimming in heavy syrup was a cafeteria staple that made fruit feel like dessert, each spoonful glistening with sugary liquid that pooled at the bottom of the bowl. Peach halves, pear slices, and fruit cocktail arrived in industrial cans that lunch workers opened before portioning the contents into small dishes. The syrup was thick and sweet, the kind of liquid children instinctively drank after finishing the fruit itself. Schools served it proudly because it counted as a fruit serving, checking a nutritional box without requiring the expense of fresh produce. Parents assumed their children were eating something healthy because the word fruit appeared on the menu. But those heavy syrups contained enough added sugar to rival candy, turning what should have been a wholesome choice into something far less innocent. When regulators examined the sugar content hiding in school fruit servings, heavy syrup became an immediate target. Today, canned fruit in schools must be packed in water, natural juice, or light syrup containing a fraction of the sugar children once consumed without question. The fruit tastes different now, less like a treat and more like what it always should have been. Partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening was the invisible ingredient that made everything in the cafeteria taste better, richer, and more satisfying than it had any right to be. Cooks used it for frying, baking, and greasing every pan that produced the foods children loved most. The shortening came in large containers beside industrial stoves, scooped out by the cupful and melted into recipes passed down through decades of school food service. Nobody questioned it because nobody knew there was anything to question. Trans fats extended shelf life, improved texture, and cost far less than butter or other alternatives. The cookies were flakier, the pie crusts more tender, and the fried foods crispier because of this single ingredient that touched nearly everything on the menu. But scientists discovered that trans fats raised bad cholesterol while lowering the good kind, creating a cardiovascular danger that lurked in every bite. When evidence became undeniable, regulators banned partially hydrogenated oils entirely. School kitchens had to reformulate everything, replacing the shortening that had defined cafeteria cooking for generations. The foods remain, but they taste different now. Full-fat cheese smothering nachos and pizza was one of the great pleasures of 80s school lunches, thick orange layers that stretched and pulled with every bite. Pizza day meant rectangles of dough buried under blankets of melted cheese glistening under heat lamps, while Nacho Day brought mountains of chips covered in warm cheese sauce dripping from every edge. Kids devoured these meals without a thought about fat content or dietary consequences. Cheese was simply delicious, a food group unto itself that made everything taste better. Schools served it generously because children actually ate their lunches when cheese was involved, solving the problem of wasted food and hungry afternoon students. The cheese came from massive blocks or industrial bags, measured by the handful rather than the ounce. But full-fat dairy carried more saturated fat than nutritionists eventually deemed acceptable for growing children. When federal guidelines restricted the types of cheese schools could serve, cafeterias switched to reduced fat versions that melted differently and tasted less rich. Students today eat pizza and nachos that look similar but lack the indulgent quality that made those meals legendary. Unlimited portion sizes with no calorie caps defined the generous spirit of school cafeterias in the 1980s, where lunch ladies piled food onto trays without measuring or restricting what students received. If you wanted more mashed potatoes, you got more. If the serving of spaghetti looked small, a friendly scoop made it larger. Schools operated on the philosophy that growing children needed fuel, and fuel meant food without limits. Nobody tracked calories because nobody thought calories mattered for kids burning energy on playgrounds. The lunch line moved fast, and portions reflected whatever fit on the tray rather than any nutritional calculation. Some students ate modest amounts while others piled their plates high, and both approaches were accepted. But childhood obesity rates began climbing in ways that alarmed health officials. Studies connected unlimited school portions to eating habits that followed children into adulthood. Federal regulations eventually imposed strict calorie ranges for school meals. Today, portion sizes are measured precisely, and seconds are often impossible to obtain. The abundance that once defined cafeteria culture has been replaced by careful control. Salisbury steak drenched in high-sodium gravy was the kind of cafeteria comfort food that made even picky eaters clean their trays in the 1980s. The oval-shaped patties arrived swimming in thick brown sauce that glistened under serving line lights, looking like something from a home-cooked dinner. Kids loved how the gravy soaked into everything it touched, turning mashed potatoes into a savory puddle and making even overcooked vegetables taste acceptable. Lunch ladies ladled it generously, sometimes giving extra to students who asked politely. The saltiness was part of the appeal, that rich, almost addictive flavor that made you want to scrape every last drop from your tray. Nobody questioned the sodium content because nobody thought about sodium at all. It was simply good food that filled bellies and kept students happy through afternoon classes. But when nutritionists examined what schools actually served, the sodium levels in that beloved gravy raised immediate alarms. Federal guidelines now cap sodium strictly, and the gravy that once defined Salisbury Steak Day has been reformulated into something far less indulgent. Sugary breakfast cereals served as main courses were a strange but beloved part of school nutrition in the 1980s, appearing on lunch trays as if morning and midday had merged. Schools offered boxes of Frosted Flakes and Cocoa Puffs alongside milk cartons, letting students pour their own bowls right in the cafeteria. It seemed like a treat, a break from the usual mystery meats and overcooked vegetables. Kids loved the crunch, the sweetness, and the feeling that they were getting away with something reserved for Saturday mornings. Parents rarely questioned it because cereal was considered wholesome, fortified with vitamins the boxes proudly advertised. Nobody stopped to calculate how much sugar hid inside each colorful serving. The milk turned pastel shades as children slurped the last sweet drops, unaware of the nutritional void they had consumed. But when added sugar limits became part of federal school meal standards, those cereal boxes disappeared almost overnight. The sugar content far exceeded what regulators now permit. Today, breakfast cereals in schools must meet strict sugar caps that leave no room for the frosted favorites that once made lunch feel like a party. Processed hot dogs served every week were a cafeteria ritual that students anticipated with genuine excitement throughout the 1980s. The smell drifted through hallways before lunch started, that unmistakable aroma of salty, smoky meat that signaled something better than the usual fare. Kids lined up eagerly, watching lunch workers use tongs to pluck pink cylinders from warming trays and nestle them into soft white buns. The hot dogs came loaded with nitrates and sodium, preserved with chemicals that extended shelf life, but nobody cared about ingredient lists back then. Squiggles of ketchup and mustard completed the meal, and students devoured them in minutes. Schools loved hot dogs because they were cheap, easy to prepare, and never generated complaints. The tubes of processed meat checked every box that mattered in an era focused on convenience rather than nutrition. But research eventually linked processed meats to health concerns that regulators could not ignore. Nitrates, sodium levels, and overall quality came under scrutiny. Federal guidelines now restrict how often schools can serve processed meats, effectively ending the weekly hot dog tradition. Kool-Aid and sugary fruit drinks flowed freely through school cafeterias in the 1980s, filling pitchers with bright colors that looked like liquid candy. Kids grabbed cups without hesitation, pouring glasses of red punch or grape drink that contained almost no actual fruit. The sweetness was intense, the colors vivid, and the appeal undeniable to young taste buds raised on similar drinks at home. Schools offered these beverages because they were cheap, easy to prepare, and popular enough to keep students hydrated. Parents assumed fruit drink meant something healthy, trusting labels that mentioned vitamins while ignoring the sugar content in smaller print. Each cup delivered a rush of sweetness that spiked energy levels before crashing them back down. But when obesity rates climbed and researchers examined what children actually consumed at school, sugary beverages became an obvious target. Federal regulations now strictly limit what schools can serve, permitting only water, plain milk, and 100% fruit juice. The pitchers of Kool-Aid and fruit punch have vanished entirely, replaced by hydration stations that offer nothing but what the body actually needs. Full sugar cookies and brownies served daily were the sweet punctuation marks at the end of every cafeteria meal in the 1980s, waiting near the register like rewards for finishing lunch. The cookies were thick and chewy, sometimes still warm from industrial ovens. The brownies came in dense squares with crackled tops, rich enough to leave chocolate on fingers. Students grabbed them eagerly, sometimes trading main courses just to secure an extra dessert. Schools saw no problem offering sweets every single day because dessert was simply part of a complete meal, something that made children happy. The sugar content was astronomical by modern standards, packed into treats that exceeded daily limits in a single serving. Nobody tracked grams or worried about nutrition labels because those concerns had not yet reached cafeteria planning. But when childhood health became a national priority, daily desserts were among the first casualties. Federal guidelines now restrict how often schools can serve sweet treats and cap the sugar content of anything that appears. The cookies and brownies that remain are smaller, less sweet, and reserved for occasional appearances rather than daily indulgence. Bologna and salami sandwich options were cafeteria staples that offered students a break from hot meals in the 1980s, stacked between slices of white bread with a single leaf of lettuce for show. The processed deli meats came in perfect circles, pink and glistening with a salty sheen. Kids loved the convenience of cold sandwiches, especially on hot days when steaming trays seemed unbearable. The bologna had that distinctive flavor, somewhere between smoky and synthetic, while salami added a spicier kick. Lunch workers assembled hundreds of these sandwiches each morning, wrapping them in plastic for easy distribution. Nobody questioned what went into those perfectly round slices or why they stayed fresh so long. The sodium content alone would alarm modern nutritionists, packed into every bite alongside preservatives that extended shelf life. But processed deli meats eventually came under scrutiny as researchers connected them to health concerns. Federal guidelines now limit sodium and restrict how often schools can serve processed meats. The bologna sandwiches that once filled coolers have largely disappeared, replaced by options meeting stricter standards. Canned vegetables loaded with added sodium were the token healthy option on cafeteria trays throughout the 1980s, scooped from industrial cans into serving pans where they sat under heat lamps. Green beans, corn, peas, and carrots arrived pre-cooked and swimming in liquid that contained more salt than most realized. The vegetables themselves were mushy, colorless, and barely recognizable as fresh produce. Kids pushed them around their trays, occasionally eating a few bites to satisfy watchful lunch monitors before abandoning the rest. Schools served them because they counted as vegetable servings, checking nutritional boxes without requiring the expense of fresh alternatives. The canning process preserved these vegetables indefinitely, making them perfect for tight budgets. But that preservation came with a sodium cost that nutritionists eventually deemed unacceptable. When federal guidelines began restricting sodium in school meals, canned vegetables became an immediate problem. Today, schools must serve fresh, frozen, or low-sodium canned options that bear little resemblance to the salty, overcooked vegetables that once defined the healthy corner of every lunch tray. Corn dogs fried in vegetable shortening were carnival food that somehow became a cafeteria regular in the 1980s, arriving on trays like golden scepters of processed delight. The cornmeal batter puffed up perfectly around hot dogs, creating a crispy shell that shattered with each bite. Kids loved them because they felt special, a departure from the usual rotation that reminded them of county fairs and summer afternoons. Schools fried them in vats of partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening, the same trans fat-laden oil that made everything taste better. The smell alone drew students to the lunch line, that distinctive aroma of hot oil and sweetened batter. Lunch workers dropped frozen corn dogs into bubbling fryers without thinking about what the oil contained. The trans fats made the coating crispier and the flavor richer, hiding dangers that science had not yet revealed. But when researchers connected trans fats to serious cardiovascular problems, regulators banned partially hydrogenated oils entirely. The corn dogs served today are baked or fried in healthier alternatives that cannot replicate the forbidden crunch. Something essential was lost. Iceberg lettuce, as the only vegetable option, was the sad reality of salad bars and side dishes throughout school cafeterias in the 1980s. Pale wedges and shredded piles that passed for nutrition without delivering much. The lettuce arrived in massive heads that lunch workers chopped into portions, filling bowls with crunchy water that contained almost no vitamins or fiber. Students who wanted something green had no choice but to accept these anemic offerings, sometimes drowning them in dressing just to make them palatable. Schools loved Iceberg because it was cheap, lasted forever in refrigeration, and nobody complained about its bland presence. It satisfied the requirement that vegetables appear on every tray. But nutritionally, Iceberg lettuce offered almost nothing compared to darker leafy greens considered too expensive for school menus. When federal guidelines began requiring nutrient-dense vegetables, Iceberg as a sole option became unacceptable. Schools must now offer dark, leafy greens, red and orange vegetables, and legumes that provide actual nutritional value. The pale lettuce remains available, but it can no longer pretend to be the only vegetable students need. Full-fat ranch dressing ladled freely was the great equalizer of school cafeterias in the 1980s. The creamy white sauce that made every vegetable and every dry piece of chicken suddenly edible. Dispensers sat at the end of lunch lines, and students pumped generous portions onto trays without anyone monitoring how much poured out. The dressing was thick, tangy, and rich with buttermilk flavor that transformed even the most unappetizing cafeteria offerings. Kids discovered that ranch made everything better, dipping pizza crusts, carrot sticks, and French fries into puddles of creamy goodness. Schools kept dispensers full because ranch encouraged students to eat their vegetables, solving a problem that had plagued cafeterias for decades. Nobody calculated the fat and calories hiding in each generous serving or how quickly those numbers added up. But when nutritionists examined what students consumed, ranch dressing emerged as a hidden source of excess fat and sodium. Federal guidelines now require portion control and low-fat alternatives that taste nothing like the original. The dispensers have been replaced by small cups that ration what once flowed freely. Chicken nuggets made with mystery meat fillers were the golden treasures of school cafeterias in the 1980s. Bite-sized pieces that kids popped into their mouths without wondering what was inside. The breading was crispy, the shapes familiar, and the taste salty enough to satisfy picky eaters. Schools served them by the hundreds, dumping frozen bags into ovens. What nobody knew was that those nuggets contained far more than chicken breast. Processors used mechanically separated poultry, skin, fat, and fillers that stretched the meat while keeping costs low. The pink paste that formed each nugget bore little resemblance to the chicken families imagined. Parents trusted the word chicken on the menu without questioning what percentage came from muscle meat. But when food investigators examined school lunch ingredients, the truth about nugget composition sparked outrage. Federal guidelines now require that chicken products contain whole muscle meat, banning the mystery fillers that once made nuggets so cheap and popular. The nuggets served today meet standards the originals never could. Tater tots fried in hydrogenated oils were the crispy companions to nearly every cafeteria entree in the 1980s, tumbling onto trays in golden piles that students devoured first. The outside shattered perfectly while the inside stayed fluffy, a textural miracle that made bland main courses feel complete. Schools fried them in vats of partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, the trans fat-laden shortening that gave everything that crunch. Kids dipped them in ketchup, stacked them into towers, and traded them across cafeteria tables. The smell announced their arrival, that distinctive aroma of hot oil and shredded potato drawing students to the lunch line. Nobody questioned what made them taste so good or why they stayed crispy longer than anything at home. The trans fats were doing their invisible work, extending texture while damaging cardiovascular systems. When regulators banned partially hydrogenated oils, tater tots had to be reformulated. The versions served today are baked or fried in healthier alternatives, but fans insist something essential disappeared with the forbidden fats. Vending machine candy bars and sodas lined school hallways throughout the 1980s, glowing boxes of temptation that accepted quarters and dispensed pure sugar. Students fed coins into slots between classes, grabbing chocolate bars and cans of cola that replaced actual meals. The machines hummed constantly, restocked by vendors who knew what kids wanted most. Schools welcomed the revenue, using profits for sports equipment and extras that tight budgets could not cover. Parents had no idea their children were purchasing candy during school hours, assuming cafeteria meals were the only food available. The sugar and empty calories added up quickly, contributing to energy crashes and eating habits that followed students into adulthood. But when childhood obesity became a national concern, vending machines faced scrutiny. Smart Snacks standards now ban candy, soda, and junk food from school vending machines entirely. The glowing boxes remain in some hallways, but their contents have been replaced by water, juice, and snacks meeting strict nutritional requirements. The easy sugar fix is gone. Peanut butter sandwiches without allergy protocols were the default fallback of school cafeterias in the 1980s, always available for students who rejected the hot lunch or forgot their money. Lunch workers spread thick layers across white bread without gloves, warnings, or thought about who might be allergic. The sandwiches sat in open bins, sometimes touching other foods, handled by multiple workers before reaching students. Nobody tracked ingredients or posted allergen notices because food allergies were barely discussed. Kids with peanut allergies either avoided the cafeteria entirely or risked reactions that could turn deadly. Parents trusted schools without realizing how casually peanut products moved through shared spaces. But as allergy diagnoses increased and reactions grew severe, the casual approach became impossible to defend. Today, many schools have banned peanut products entirely, while others follow strict protocols requiring separate preparation areas and clear labeling. The peanut butter sandwich that solved every cafeteria problem has become a liability. Styrofoam lunch trays were the lightweight workhorses of school cafeterias throughout the 1980s, disposable platforms that held everything from sloppy joes to fruit cocktail without bending. Students grabbed them from tall stacks at the start of every lunch line, sliding them along metal rails as workers filled each compartment. The trays were cheap, convenient, and required no washing, perfect for schools on tight budgets. Kids stabbed them with forks, cracked them for fun, and tossed them into overflowing trash cans. Nobody considered what happened after garbage trucks hauled them away or how long they would persist in landfills. The foam contained chemicals that researchers later connected to health concerns, especially when hot foods touched the material. Environmental awareness eventually caught up with convenience. Many districts have now banned styrofoam trays entirely, replacing them with compostable alternatives or reusable dishes. The lightweight trays that seemed practical have become symbols of an era that prioritized convenience over consequences. Orbitz was the drink that looked more like a science experiment than a thirst quencher. In the late 1990s, kids would stop in the grocery store aisle just to stare at the bottles, bright liquids with tiny gelatin spheres suspended inside, floating like little planets in a lava lamp. It was supposed to be futuristic, a drink you could both sip and watch. The first sip was strange, a mix of sweet syrup and jelly-like orbs drifting on your tongue. For some, it was a revelation. For others, pure confusion. But no one could deny that it was unlike anything else on Earth. People were fascinated, but they were also confused. The texture was unlike anything they had ever felt. Too thick to gulp, too thin to chew. The Food and Drug Administration soon stepped in, failing the product's stability tests because the suspended beads did not stay evenly distributed over time. Bottles leaked, clumps formed, and the novelty turned into a sticky mess. Within 2 years, Orbitz disappeared from shelves, remembered more for its weirdness than its taste. But for those who tried it, the memory still feels strangely magical. A moment when food and science collided in the most bizarre way imaginable. It might not have lasted long, but it showed how curiosity could make something as simple as a drink feel like a glimpse into the future. Red dye. Number 2 colored fast food desserts with a brilliant cherry red that made everything look irresistible during the 1970s. Shakes, sundaes, pie fillings, and promotional treats all glowed with that unmistakable hue, catching the eyes of children who pointed at menu boards and begged their parents for something sweet. The dye was everywhere, added to anything that needed a burst of appetizing color, and nobody questioned whether the vibrant shade came from something safe. Families trusted that anything served at a restaurant had been tested, approved, and perfectly fine to eat. But behind the scenes, researchers were discovering troubling links between red dye number 2 and cancer in laboratory animals. The findings sparked public panic, congressional hearings, and eventually a full ban in 1976. Fast food chains scrambled to reformulate their recipes, swapping the familiar red for alternatives that did not carry the same risks. The cherry-colored desserts of the early 70s vanished almost overnight, replaced by versions that looked slightly different but no longer carried a hidden danger in every spoonful. In 2009, Nestlé Toll House cookie dough, something nearly every American household trusted, became the center of a national panic. For decades, people could not resist sneaking a spoonful straight from the mixing bowl. It was childhood rebellion in its sweetest form, a taste of doughy, buttery comfort. But that year, hospitals began linking a mysterious wave of E. coli infections to unbaked Toll House dough. Investigators traced the bacteria to contaminated flour and eggs, something no one ever thought twice about. The news spread fast, and families across the country threw away tubs of dough from their refrigerators. It was a moment of disbelief. How could something so innocent, so normal, become dangerous? The recall changed food laws forever. New reformulation rules required pasteurization and clear warnings against eating raw dough, ending an era of guilty pleasure. Nestlé later reintroduced a safer version, but it never quite felt the same. People began to bake their cookies all the way through, no longer daring to take that secret taste. Still, the memory of licking the spoon while baking with family lingers for millions, a reminder that nostalgia often hides in the smallest, simplest moments. And sometimes those moments vanish overnight, not because we outgrow them, but because safety finally caught up to sweetness. Glass baby bottles with lead paint designs were once a symbol of love and care. Parents in the 1950s adored them, decorated with cheerful ducks, rabbits, and pastel-colored animals. They were gifts for baby showers, proudly displayed in kitchen cabinets, tiny keepsakes of innocence. It was the height of the post-war baby boom, and the market was flooded with products that blended charm with modern design. Mothers trusted anything that looked sanitary and cute, assuming regulators had already done the worrying for them. But in truth, safety testing barely existed. Style mattered more than science. The paint used for decoration contained lead, a neurotoxin that accumulates in growing children and causes irreversible brain damage. No one imagined those smiling cartoon faces could poison their babies. For years, infants drank warm milk from bottles that looked wholesome but were dangerously contaminated. By the time regulators banned lead paint, the damage had already reached countless households. Modern parents might shudder at the thought, but those pastel bottles still turn up in antique stores, a haunting reminder that even the cutest products can hide something cruel. Beauty, it turns out, should never come before safety. Radithor energy water was the drink that literally glowed with danger. Sold as a miracle tonic, it contained radium. Yes, the same radioactive element used in luminous paint and nuclear experiments. In the early part of the 20th century, radioactive meant powerful, not deadly. Companies bottled the promise of vitality and sold it to anyone who wanted to feel younger, stronger, and more alive. By the 1950s, it still lingered on dusty pharmacy shelves and in small-town grocery stores, the last echo of a deadly fad. People swore it cured fatigue, aches, and even impotence. What it actually did was slowly destroy the bones and organs of those who drank it. The most infamous case was that of Eben Byers, a wealthy industrialist who consumed bottles daily until his jaw literally disintegrated. The scandal forced regulators to finally ban all radioactive health products, but Radithor's legend endured. It became the ghost story of the grocery aisle, a reminder of what happens when trust and ignorance collide. In an age obsessed with miracle cures, it stands as one of history's most chilling examples of how far people will go to feel better, even as it kills them from the inside out. There was a time when everyone carried Certs mints in their pockets, little silver rolls promising 2 mints in 1. What made them special was the ingredient called retsin, a shiny green fleck that was advertised as a miracle compound for fresh breath. It was supposed to neutralize odors better than anything else on the market. People believed in it like magic, tiny specks of freshness that could erase the smell of coffee or a nervous lunch before a date. It was small but mighty, a sign that you cared about how you presented yourself to the world. Even the way the foil unwrapped had a familiar sound, like the opening note of confidence itself. For decades, Certs were part of American life, sold at gas stations, kept in car consoles, shared before job interviews or first dates. But when the Food and Drug Administration re-examined retsin, it found that the blend of copper gluconate and hydrogenated oil was not as safe or effective as claimed. The ruling forced the end of production, and one of America's simplest pleasures disappeared overnight. Today, the word Certs barely rings a bell, but for many, that minty crunch lives on in memory. It was never just about breath. It was about confidence, a tiny piece of everyday ritual that quietly vanished from the grocery aisle. BPA-lined drink cups were standard issue at fast food counters throughout the 1970s, holding everything from sodas to milkshakes without anyone questioning what the plastic contained. Bisphenol A was used to harden the cups, make them durable, and prevent cracking under the stress of ice, heat, and constant handling. Customers grabbed these cups by the millions, sipping through straws while chemicals slowly leached into their beverages. Children drank from them at birthday parties, road trips, and countless afternoons spent in sticky booths under fluorescent lights. The cups felt sturdy, convenient, and completely harmless. But BPA mimics estrogen in the body, disrupting hormones in ways that researchers only fully understood decades later. Studies linked it to developmental problems, reproductive issues, and increased cancer risks, especially in young children whose systems were still forming. When the evidence mounted, regulators banned BPA from baby bottles first, then expanded restrictions to other food contact materials. Today, most drink cups proudly advertise themselves as BPA-free, a label that would have meant nothing to families in the 70s. Formaldehyde-laced milk sounds like something out of a nightmare, but in the early 1950s it was a reality for some families. When refrigeration was expensive and spoilage high, certain dairy producers found a shortcut. Add a touch of formaldehyde, a preservative used for embalming. It kept the milk fresh longer, even in the heat. To the average shopper, this was the golden age of trust. If it came in a bottle with a farm logo, it had to be safe. The idea that something so pure-looking could be chemically tampered with was unthinkable. But greed and convenience always find their way into progress, especially when no one is watching. Consumers never suspected a thing, trusting the white liquid poured into their children's cereal bowls. For years, families drank what they believed was the purest symbol of health, completely unaware of the chemical lurking within. It took illness, lawsuits, and stricter inspections to expose the practice. Once the scandal broke, public trust in the dairy industry took a hit that lasted decades. The lesson was clear: not everything that looks wholesome is. Sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that seem the most natural. In the 1970s, candy was not just candy. It was curiosity, risk, and play. That is why a strange little product called Love Drops gum caused such a stir. Marketed as an aphrodisiac, it claimed to make you feel bold, confident, and maybe even romantic. Teenagers dared each other to try it, giggling in convenience store aisles as they handed over a few coins for a pack. The gum's packaging promised excitement, but no one really knew what was inside. That mystery was part of its allure. Later testing revealed that Love Drops contained unregulated herbal extracts and stimulants that acted like mild drugs. The Food and Drug Administration quickly stepped in, banning its sale nationwide. Parents were horrified, schools issued warnings, and the candy disappeared as suddenly as it arrived. But for those who remember the era, Love Drops was not just about the gum. It was about the spirit of experimentation that defined the 70s. A time when products flirted with the line between fun and forbidden. Looking back, it feels almost innocent compared to what followed, but it was the first sign that even in the candy aisle, the world was beginning to take pleasure and danger a lot more seriously. Lead-soldered soda fountain lines were hidden behind every counter where teenagers poured drinks and families refilled cups during the 1970s. The metal tubing that carried syrup and carbonated water from storage tanks to dispensers was often joined with lead solder, a practice so common that nobody questioned it. Customers stood at self-serve stations, pressing buttons and watching fizzy streams fill their cups, completely unaware that trace amounts of lead were dissolving into every sip. The soft drinks tasted fine, the machines hummed along reliably, and restaurant owners had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. But lead does not belong anywhere near food or drink. Even small exposures can cause neurological damage, developmental delays in children, and long-term health problems that do not show up for years. Once researchers traced contamination back to fountain equipment, regulators moved quickly to ban lead solder from anything touching consumables. Restaurants scrambled to replace tubing, retrofit machines, and prove their systems were safe. Today, the idea of lead leaching into a cup of soda feels unthinkable, but for an entire generation it was simply part of the experience. Brominated vegetable oil, or BVO, was the secret ingredient that made 1950s fruit sodas look and taste so good. It kept the citrus flavor evenly mixed, preventing that oily layer from rising to the top. The chemistry was clever, the flavor refreshing, and the bright bottles flew off the shelves. For decades, no one questioned what brominated meant. It just sounded scientific, and science meant progress. But studies later revealed the truth. Bromine compounds did not just disappear. They built up in human tissue, especially fat, leading to headaches, memory loss, and nerve issues. It was found in everything from orange soda to sports drinks, hiding behind harmless-sounding labels. Teenagers drank it daily without a clue that it shared a chemical base with flame retardants. When that fact hit the headlines, even the most loyal soda drinkers turned queasy. The same chemical family used in flame retardants was floating in your orange soda. When the public finally learned, it was too late for many. BVO had been in use for over 30 years. The Food and Drug Administration eventually banned it, leaving soda makers scrambling for safer replacements. Still, those who grew up in that era can probably remember the taste: sweet, fizzy, and unknowingly toxic. Ecto-Cooler. Hi-C was pure childhood magic poured into a box. Inspired by the Ghostbusters craze of the 80s, it glowed with a radioactive green that no fruit on Earth had ever seen. It tasted like tangerine mixed with nostalgia and a hint of Saturday morning cartoons. Every kid in America wanted it in their lunchbox, and every parent knew exactly what that neon color meant: artificial dyes and plenty of sugar. It stained your tongue, your clothes, and sometimes even the kitchen counter, but no one cared. Kids sipped it like it was a secret potion, their own piece of Ghostbusters magic in liquid form. Years later, when regulations began restricting synthetic food colorings linked to hyperactivity and health concerns, the drink quietly disappeared. But it left behind a generation of kids who still swear it tasted better than anything since. For many, it was not just juice. It was a piece of their childhood, a reminder of how fun could come in the strangest colors. Even now, when someone finds an old box online or a commemorative re-release, it feels like opening a time capsule from a brighter, weirder world where even your drink looked like slime. Beef tallow frying oil gave fast food French fries their legendary taste during the 1970s, creating a flavor so distinctive that people still talk about it with genuine longing. Major chains cooked their fries in rendered beef fat because it produced a crispy exterior, a fluffy interior, and a richness that vegetable oils simply could not replicate. Families drove miles out of their way just for those fries, not knowing that the secret ingredient was animal fat sizzling in massive industrial fryers. The aroma drifted across parking lots, drawing customers in like a siren call that nobody wanted to resist. But as heart disease research advanced, saturated fats became public enemy number one. Health campaigns warned consumers about cholesterol, clogged arteries, and the dangers lurking in their favorite comfort foods. Chains faced mounting pressure to switch to vegetable oils, and one by one they abandoned beef tallow entirely. The fries changed forever, losing that unmistakable depth that had defined them for years. Today, cooking with beef tallow in commercial settings faces heavy restrictions, and the original recipe exists only in memory and nostalgia. In the 1950s, DDT was a household name for all the wrong reasons. Farmers, grocers, and even homemakers believed it was a miracle, a chemical that could protect crops from pests and keep fruits looking fresh for weeks. Produce was sprayed, dusted, and even rinsed in it before hitting grocery shelves. Apples gleamed brighter, tomatoes stayed red longer, and no one questioned it. You could not see the danger, and that made it easy to ignore. Decades later, scientists discovered that DDT was more than just a pesticide. It was a poison that lingered in soil, water, and even human tissue. It killed insects, yes, but it also harmed birds, fish, and people. The chemical built up in the environment until its effects could not be denied. The once fresh produce of the 1950s became a warning from history. What we cannot see can still hurt us. When DDT was banned, it marked a turning point in how America thought about safety, trust, and the true cost of convenience. It might sound strange now, but the original Kinder Surprise egg from Europe was once one of the most exciting treasures a child could find on a store shelf. Imagine peeling back the shiny foil, breaking open that sweet chocolate shell, and discovering a tiny toy inside, something to build or collect. It was more than candy. It was an experience that made every trip to the grocery store feel like an adventure. But the United States government saw something else inside those eggs: danger. The small toys were hidden completely within the chocolate, making them a choking hazard, especially for children who bit too eagerly. The Food and Drug Administration stepped in, declaring that no food could contain non-nutritive items inside it. Parents protested, children cried, and the eggs vanished before most Americans ever got to try one. What survived were distant memories and imported stories about a forbidden treat, the kind you could only find overseas. Even today, The thought of biting into one feels a little rebellious, a little nostalgic, as if breaking the law never tasted so sweet. Trans fats in French fries were the golden secret behind every crispy batch that came out of fast food kitchens during the 1970s. The fries tasted incredible, with a richness and crunch that seemed almost magical, and nobody questioned what made them so impossibly delicious. Restaurants fried them in partially hydrogenated vegetable oils because it was cheap, stable, and kept the fryers running smoothly day after day. Families ordered them by the bagful, letting kids reach in during long car rides while grease soaked through the paper. The smell alone could pull you into a parking lot from blocks away. But those oils were doing something far worse than adding calories. Trans fats raised bad cholesterol, lowered good cholesterol, and dramatically increased the risk of heart disease in ways scientists were only beginning to understand. By the time research caught up with the industry, millions of people had already eaten their way through countless servings without a single warning. Regulators eventually stepped in, and today trans fats are banned entirely from restaurant kitchens. What once made fries unforgettable is now considered one of the most dangerous ingredients ever served. Asbestos oven mitts and hot pads were marketed as indestructible. Advertisements promised they could handle any heat without ever catching fire. Housewives trusted them, pulling casseroles and roasts straight from the oven with confidence. It was the post-war era of atomic age optimism, when scientific materials meant progress and danger felt impossible. The word asbestos was said with pride. It sounded technical, modern, and safe. Nobody imagined that the same mineral used in insulation and factories could turn a kitchen into a slow-motion health hazard. The secret was asbestos, a mineral that could resist flames but released deadly fibers every time it was touched. Each squeeze, each fold, released invisible dust into the air. Over time, those fibers lodged deep in the lungs, leading to mesothelioma and other fatal illnesses decades later. The danger was silent and patient, hiding behind the promise of safety. By the time the truth came out, many who used them daily were already sick. Asbestos was once hailed as the perfect material for modern living. It ended up becoming one of history's most infamous killers. Those oven mitts, sold with warmth and trust, literally took people's breath away. There was a time when ketchup came in colors you would never believe. Green Heinz EZ Squirt hit shelves in the early 2000s and turned every kid's meal into a wild art project. The company wanted to make eating fun again. Bright purple, blue, and green sauces that squirted out of rocket-shaped bottles. Parents bought them by the dozen, and kids painted their French fries and hot dogs like edible canvases. The ketchup splattered across plates and lunch tables, creating masterpieces no art class could ever allow. Children squealed with laughter, while parents wondered how they would ever clean it off. For a brief, chaotic moment, dinner felt like finger painting with food, but the colors came at a cost. Those neon hues were powered by synthetic dyes later linked to behavioral issues and health risks in children. When regulations tightened around artificial food colorings, Heinz quietly pulled the plug. The bottles vanished, leaving behind only memories of bright green burgers and blue spaghetti nights. It was a strange experiment in marketing, one that proved just how far people would go for a dash of novelty at the dinner table. Still, anyone who grew up with EZ Squirt remembers it fondly, because nothing tasted quite like ketchup that looked like slime. Unpasteurized soft-serve ice cream swirled out of machines at fast food restaurants throughout the 1970s, offering creamy sweetness that families lined up to enjoy. The soft-serve bases were often made with raw dairy products that had not been heat-treated to kill harmful bacteria, and the machines themselves were breeding grounds for contamination if not cleaned obsessively. Kids watched the white ribbons coil into cones, never imagining that the treat they craved could make them sick. Outbreaks of salmonella and listeria traced back to soft-serve machines began making headlines, and health investigators discovered just how dangerous the combination of raw ingredients and inconsistent sanitation could be. Families who had trusted these desserts for years suddenly learned that something so innocent-looking could send them to the hospital. Regulators responded with strict pasteurization requirements and mandatory cleaning schedules that transformed how soft serve was produced and served. Today, every swirl that comes out of a machine has been through safety protocols that simply did not exist when your parents were kids. Tinned fish packed in PCB-laced oil was once considered a healthy, protein-rich option for busy families. Tuna, sardines, and anchovies sat neatly in shiny metal tins, waiting to become quick lunches or midnight snacks. The oil inside kept them moist and flavorful, but it also carried a hidden poison. At the time, convenience was king, and no one thought to question what made those tins last so long on the shelf. Housewives trusted the packaging, the labels, and the smiling faces in the ads that promised ocean-fresh flavor. The irony was cruel. In trying to make food safer from spoilage, manufacturers had filled it with something far worse. Polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, were used in industrial lubricants and electrical equipment. Somehow, they found their way into the oils used for food preservation, contaminating entire batches of canned fish. PCBs did not break down easily. They accumulated in the body, linked to cancers and reproductive harm. At the time, no one had a clue that a simple tuna sandwich could contain a chemical cousin of motor oil. When the scandal finally broke, it rocked the seafood industry and reshaped how food safety was monitored. Factories were overhauled, regulations tightened, and faith in clean eating took a heavy blow. The sea that had fed generations now carried a warning label of its own. Crystal Pepsi was the drink that tried to reinvent soda and accidentally confused everyone. In the early 1990s, Pepsi wanted to symbolize purity and transparency, so they made a cola with no color at all. It looked like sparkling water but tasted like Pepsi, and that contradiction fascinated people. People stared at it on shelves, unsure if it was a prank or a promise, and yet curiosity always won. For a brief moment, it felt like drinking the future, a crystal-clear revolution in a brown-colored world. Even opening the bottle had a sense of wonder, like unveiling a secret that was hiding in plain sight. For a short while, it became a phenomenon. Commercials promised a clean, futuristic world in a clear bottle. But the illusion shattered quickly. Many consumers thought it was diet soda, while others complained that it tasted off, even though the formula was almost identical. Mislabeling, marketing confusion, and failed freshness tests in certain regions sealed its fate. It vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Still, for those who remember it, Crystal Pepsi was unforgettable, not for its flavor, but for its ambition. It was a reminder that sometimes, when you try too hard to make something clear, you end up losing what made it real. Cyclamate sweeteners and diet drinks lingered on fast food menus during the early 1970s, even after federal regulators had already raised serious concerns. The artificial sweetener had been wildly popular because it tasted closer to sugar than anything else on the market, and diet-conscious customers loved how it let them enjoy sodas without the calories. Fast food chains served Cyclamate-sweetened beverages to millions of people who believed they were making a healthier choice. The drinks came in tall cups with refills available, and nobody mentioned that the sweetener inside had been linked to bladder cancer in laboratory studies. The ban officially arrived in 1970, but existing inventory and slow compliance meant Cyclamate products remained available far longer than they should have. Families continued ordering diet drinks without realizing the regulatory battle happening behind the scenes. By the time Cyclamate finally disappeared from American menus, it had already been consumed by an entire generation of dieters. Today, the sweetener remains banned in the United States, a reminder that not every shortcut to fewer calories comes without a cost. Aerosol cheese in steel cans was the kind of futuristic food that only the 1950s could have dreamed up. It was creamy, convenient, and somehow scientific. All the things that modern America was obsessed with at the time. Housewives marveled at how it could be sprayed directly onto crackers, celery sticks, or even straight into the mouth of a giggling child. It felt like progress you could taste. No knife, no cleanup, no effort. The secret behind the spray was pressure from chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, the same chemicals used in aerosol hairspray and refrigeration. They made the cheese foam perfectly, airy and light, and gave it that signature hiss when you pressed the nozzle. Nobody thought twice about it until scientists in the 1970s revealed that CFCs were eating away at the ozone layer, literally tearing a hole in the atmosphere. What had once been the pride of kitchen technology suddenly became an environmental villain. The cheese itself wasn't the problem. It was what made it spray that turned it into a global issue. Companies scrambled to replace the formula, switching to safer propellants, but the reputation stuck. The phrase "cheese in a can" went from novelty to punchline. For those who lived through its rise, it will always taste like nostalgia and a little bit of guilt. Before you go, tell us which banned school lunch you missed the most in the comments. Tap like if these cafeteria memories hit home, and subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the trays we left behind.